Dornford Yates was the pseudonym of the English novelist Cecil William Mercer, whose novels and short stories, some humorous, some thrillers, were bestsellers in the 21-year interwar period between the First and Second World Wars. The pen name, Dornford Yates, first in print in 1910, resulted from combining the surnames of his mothers, the paternal Eliza Mary Dornford, and the maternal Harriet Yates. Early life. William Mercer was born in Walmer, Kent, the son of Cecil John Mercer and Helen Wall. His father was a solicitor whose sister, Mary Frances, married Charles Augustus Munro. The son was Hector Hugh Munro. Bill Mercer is said to have idolized his elder cousin. Mercer attended St. Clair Preparatory School in Walmer from 1894 to 1899. The family moved from Kent to London when he joined Harrow School as a day pupil in 1899, his father selling his solicitor's practice in Kent and setting up office in Carey Street. Leaving Harrow in 1903, he attended University College, Oxford in 1904, where he achieved a third in law. At university, he was active in the Oxford University Dramatic Society, becoming secretary in 1906 and president in 1907, his final year. He acted in the 1905 production of Aristophanes' The Clouds, of which the Times reviewer said, among individual actors the best was Mr. C.W. Mercer, whose strepsiades was full of fun, and who possesses real comic talent. Quote, after a small part in the 1906 production of Measure for Measure in his final year, he appeared as Demetrius in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and as Pedant in The Taming of the Shrew, a production which included the professional actresses Lily Brayton as Catherine, and her sister Agnes as Bianca. Among the many useful friends Mercer made in the OUDS were Gervase Rental, who asked him to be his best man, and Lily Brayton's husband, actor Oscar Ashe, later producer of the play Kismet, and writer of Chu Chin Chow. After university, Mercer took a caravanning holiday in Hampshire, with Ashe, Lily, Agnes, and another theatrical couple, Matheson Lang and his wife, Houghton Britton. Ashe and Lang recall that holiday in the respective memoirs. Mercer's third-class Oxford law degree was insufficient to gain him traditional access to the bar. However, in 1908 his father obtained his son opposed his pupil to a prominent barrister, H.G. Muscat, whose practice often required his appearing in court on behalf of the police commissioner. As Muscat's pupil, Mercer saw much of the seedy side of London life, some of which is evident in his novels. In 1909, he was called to the bar where he worked for several years. In his first memoirs, As Barrie and I Were Saying, he recalls his involvement in the trial of the poisoner Hawley Harvey Crippen, when he returned from acting with the old stages at Canterbury, to have first look at the legal brief. Mercer is in a photograph of the Bow Street Court committal proceedings, published in the Daily Mirror of 30th of August 1910. In his spare time, he wrote short stories that were published in Punch, the Harmsworth Red magazine, Pearson's magazine, and the Windsor magazine, maintaining a relationship with this last until the end of the 1930s. After it closed, he wrote for the Strand magazine. He also assisted in the writing of What I Know, U.S. title King Edward as the First Knew Him, the memoirs of C.W. Stamper, who had been motor engineer to King Edward VII. The Great War and afterwards. At the outbreak of the Great War in 1914, Mercer joined the County of London Yeomanry and was commissioned as second lieutenant, although his stories continued to appear in the Windsor until March 1915. In 1915, his regiment left for Egypt and, in November 1915, as part of the 8th Mounted Brigade, he was sent to the Salonika, Macedonian front where the war was in stalemate. Suffering severe muscular rheumatism, he was sent home in 1917 and, although he was still in uniform, the War Office did not again post him. He eventually left the army in 1919. In June of that year, the Windsor carried his first story since the end of the war. Since 1914, the Mercer family home had been Elm Tree Road in St. John's Wood, where his friends Oscar and Lily Ash were close neighbours. In autumn of 1919, he and Ash combined to write the stage show Eastward Ho! But the production was not a great success and he did not again attempt to write for the stage. A frequent social and then romantic Elm Tree Road visitor was Bettine Stokes Edwards, an American girl who danced in Chu Chin Chow, who became Mercer's first wife. The New York Times announcement of their engagement states, Mr. and Mrs. Glover Fitzhugh Perrin of 57 West 58th Street have announced the engagement of Mrs. Perrin's oldest daughter Miss Bettine Stokes Edwards, suggesting that her father either was dead or divorced. Her remarried mother then lived in New York City. Mercer and Bettine married at St. James, Spanish Place, in the Marylebone district of London, on the 22nd of October 1919. The month of October also marked the appearance of a story in the Windsor called Valerie, whose female lead made a living as a dancer. This story never appeared in book form. Mercer decided not to return to the bar, and to concentrate on his writing. He and Bettine lived in Elm Tree Road, where their only child, Richard, was born on the 20th of July 1920. After the Great War, many ex-officers found that the rise in the cost of living in London precluded maintaining the style of life of a gentleman to which they had become accustomed. Some looked beyond England. In 1922, the Mercers emigrated to France, where it was possible to live more cheaply, and where the climate was kinder to Mercer's muscular rheumatism. French residents, they chose the resort town Pau in the Western Pyrenees, in the Basses Pyrénées département, where lived a sizable British expat colony. But when the Mercers moved in is unknown. In Dornford Yates, a biography, A. J. Smithers reports exactly how he hit upon the place is not clear, but Pau figures several times in the memoirs. He is presumed to have ghostwritten for C. W. Stamper, and so that might be the answer. Anywhere good enough for King Edward VII was good enough for him. They rented the Villa Maryland on Rue Forster, where Mercer proved an exacting husband, while Bettine was a social woman, and by 1929, the failure of the marriage was evident. Bettine had been indiscreet in her extramarital romantic liaisons, and Mercer sued for divorce. Bettine did not defend, and the divorce was made absolute in September 1933. In the event, she returned to her family in the U.S. Less than a year later, on the 10th of February 1934, at Chertsey Register Office, Mercer married Doreen Elizabeth Lucy Bowie, whom he met on a cruise in 1932. She was the daughter of London solicitor David Mather Bowie of Virginia Water. Elizabeth was 20 years younger than her new husband, who felt he had met the incarnation of his fictional Jill Mansell. Thus did he call her Jill for the rest of his life. For him, Villa Maryland had many memories of Bettine, so he and Elizabeth decided to build a new house, named Cockade. They chose a spot 20 miles south of Pau, near Aubonnes, on the route to the Spanish frontier. The project is related in the house that Barrie built, wherein the name of the house is Grace Dew. They did not enjoy long residence in Cockade. With France falling to the Wehrmacht in June 1940, the Mercers hurriedly arranged caretakers for Cockade, and then escaped the country, in company of visiting friends Matheson Lang and wife, and traversed Spain en route to Portugal. They subsequently took ship for South Africa, arriving in Salisbury, southern Rhodesia, in 1941. The Second World War and the Rhodesian years. C.W. Mercer was recommissioned in the Royal Rhodesian Regiment, and attained the rank of Major. As the war concluded, the couple realized the plan of returning to Cockade, but were disappointed in the decrepitude of the house and the socially conscious, post-war attitude of the one-time servants. After some months, the Mercers obtained exit visas and returned to Umtali, southern Rhodesia, where they lived for the rest of his life. Mercer supervised the building of a replacement house for Cockade, another hillside venture, and, in 1948, they moved into Sacredown, on Oak Avenue. The furniture in France was shipped to Rhodesia, as were the Waterloo Bridge balusters, which had never reached Cockade, but had been stored in England during the Second World War. Cecil William Mercer died in March 1960. Writings. Mercer originally wrote short stories for the monthly magazines. His first known published work, Temporary Insanity, appeared in Punch in May 1910. This is the first known occasion of his use of his pen name, and his second, Like a Tale That Is Told, appeared in the Red magazine in July 1910. The first known Barrie story to be published, Babes in the Wood, appeared in Pearson's magazine in September 1910. None of these early stories was ever included in his books. Many of his works began as stories in the Windsor magazine, before being collected in book form by the Windsor's publishers, Wardlock. Between September 1911 and September 1939 he had 123 stories published in the Windsor, and after it closed, the Strand magazine carried 3 of his stories in 1940 and 1941. 4 of his novels were serialized in Woman's Journal between 1933 and 1938. In the United States, 4 of his novels were serialized in Woman's Home Companion between 1933 and 1939, while others appeared in the Saturday Evening Post and Blue Book. His first story for the Windsor magazine was Busy Bees in September 1911, and this and 14 subsequent stories from the publication up to the July 1914 issue were republished in book form as The Brother of Daphne. In 1914, some of the stories were edited for the book, to eliminate events, such as marriage, for the leading characters, which suggests that, originally, he had not planned on using the same characters for a story series. The narrator, later identified as Boy Playdell, marries in Babes in the Wood and possibly in Busy Bees, which became the Busy Beers. A chapter in The Brother of Daphne, with the end of the story altered to remove the hint of marriage. His second book, The Courts of Idleness, was published in 1920, containing material written before, during, and after the Great War. It was divided into 3 sections. In Book 1, Yates introduced a new set of characters similar to, but separate from, Barrie and Amp Co. in 4 stories that had appeared in the Windsor between December 1914 and March 1915, and a final story from the Windsor of June 1919 in which the male characters are killed off in Salonika during the Great War. The interlude has a story entitled And the Other Left, from the November 1914 Windsor, which is set on the Western Front with a unique set of characters. Book 2 returns to the Barrie characters, with 2 pre-war stories from the August and September 1914 Windsor, and 3 post-war stories from the issues of July, August and September 1919. The book's final story, Nemesis, was written for and rejected by Punch. Subsequently, it appeared in the Windsor in November 1919, with the main character named Jeremy. For the book he became Barrie. Nemesis was written to the Punch length, and so was much shorter than most of the other stories in the Courts of Idleness. The Barrie books are semi-autobiographical, humorous romances, are often in short story form, and, in particular, feature Bertram. Barrie played Elle and his family, his wife and cousin, Daphne. Her brother, Boy, played Elle, and their cousins Jonathan, Jonah, Mansell, and his sister, Jill. Collectively, they are Barrie and Amp Co. Quote, although all five appear in Babes in the Wood, the precise relationships are unstated, and Barrie and Daphne are referred to as second cousins as late as Jonah and Amp Co. Later stories feature a simple family tree, showing them to be first cousins descended from two brothers and a sister. Barrie and Amp Co. capture the English upper classes of the Edwardian era, still self-assured, but affected by changing social attitudes and the decline of the fortunes. As in many of Yates' books, grand houses, powerful motorcars, and foreign travel feature prominently in the Barrie stories. In the 1950s, C.W. Mercer wrote two books of fictionalized memoirs, As Barrie and I Were Saying and Be Barrie and I Look Back, written as conversations between Barrie and his family. They contain many anecdotes about his experiences as a lawyer, but are, in the main, an elegy for a past upper-class way of life. The Chandos books, starting with Blind Corner in 1927, marked a change in style and content, being thrillers set mainly in continental Europe, wherein the hero narrator, Richard Chandos, and colleagues, including George Hanbury and Jonathan Mansell, tackle criminals, protect the innocent, romance beautiful ladies, and hunt for treasure. These were originally published by Hodder and Stoughton, although later they were reissued by Wardlock. It is the Chandos novels to which Alan Bennett especially refers in naming Dornford Yates in the play 40 Years On. Sapper, Buchan, Dornford Yates, practitioners in that school of snobbery with violence that runs like a thread of good-class tweed through 20th-century literature. Yates also wrote other thrillers in the same style, but with different characters. Besides the two genres in which he specialized, some of Yates' novels do not easily fall into either the humorous or the thriller category. Anthony Livedon was Dornford Yates's first novel, telling the story of an impoverished ex-officer. It ends in a cliffhanger. Originally, it was published in monthly installments in the Windsor magazine. Valerie French, the sequel to Anthony Livedon, features mostly the same cast. At the start of the book, Livedon is suffering amnesia, and cannot recall the events of the previous book, leading to romantic complications. The Stolen March is a fantasy set in a lost realm, between Spain and France, where travelers encounter characters from nursery rhymes and fairy tales. A planned sequel, The Tempered Wind, is referred to in the quasi-autobiography, Be Barrie and I Look Back, where Yates mentions abandoning the book as it failed to take charge. This publican features a scheming woman and her henpecked husband. Some critics have suggested that the portrayal of the villainess represented a thinly veiled attack on Mercer's first wife. However, it is difficult to believe that the weak-willed husband is intended as a self-portrait. Load and Vermin is a novel in which Mercer defends his views on social class, and criticizes the path Britain was following under the post-war Labour government. Ne'er-do-well is a murder story narrated by Richard Chandos, with whom the investigating policeman is staying. It features a visiting Jonathan Mansell. Wife apparent attempts to portray Dornford Yates's type of people in a 1950s setting, given that they remain essentially Edwardian in outlook. This novel is only partly successful. Bibliography: The Barrie Books, The Brother of Daphne, Short Stories. The Courts of Idleness, Short Stories. Barrie & Co. Short Stories, Jonah & Co. Short Stories, Adele & Co. Full-length novel, and Barrie Came To. Short Stories, The House That Barrie Built full-length novel, The Barrie Scene Short Stories, As Barrie and I Were Saying memoirs, B. Barrie and I Look Back memoirs, The Chandos Books Blind Corner, Perishable Goods, Blood Royal, Fire Below a.k.a. By Royal Command, She Fell Among Thieves, An Eye for a Tooth, Read in the Morning a.k.a. Were Death Denied, Cost Price a.k.a. The Laughing Bacchante. Perishable Goods acts as a sequel to Blind Corner with the same heroes and lead villain. Blood Royal and Fire Below are both set in the fictional Principality of Richtenberg, and Yates acknowledged the influence of Anthony Hope's The Prisoner of Zenda and Rupert of Hentzau. Read in the Morning follows on directly from Gale Warning. Cost Price is a sequel to Safe Custody. Other books: Anthony Livedon novel, Valerie French, the sequel novel to Anthony Livedon. Summerfruit, USA omnibus edition of Anthony Livedon and Valerie French, and 5 Were Foolish short stories. As Other Men Are short stories. The Stolen March novel, Maiden Stakes short stories, Safe Custody thriller, Storm Music thriller, She Painted Her Face thriller, This Publican a.k.a. The Devil in Satin novel, Gale Warning thriller, Shoal Water thriller, Period Stuff short stories, Lower Than Vermin novel, Ne'er a Well novel featuring a retired Chandos wife apparent novel, stage, cinema, and other media. The 1919 musical play Eastward Ho! Was written by Oscar Ashe with lyrics by Dornford Yates and music by Grace Torrance and John Ansell. It was produced by Edward Lauriard and George Grossmith Jr., and opened at the Alhambra Theatre in London on the 9th of September and ran for 124 performances. Although none of Yates's books has yet been filmed for the cinema, the BBC produced an adaptation of She Fell Among Thieves in 1977, featuring Malcolm McDowell as Chandos, Michael Jaston as Mansell, and Eileen Atkins as Vanity Fair. An episode of the ITV Hannay series, A Point of Honor, was based on the eponymous short story published in The Brother of Daphne, but the source was uncredited. An audiobook edition of Blind Corner, read by Alan Rickman, was produced by Chivers Audiobooks, but is currently out of print. The 1973 novel Indecent Exposure by Tom Sharp plays a lot upon the Englishman that Dornford Yates created in his novels. There is a group of characters in the novel who style themselves as the Dornford Yates Club and who try to emulate the master in avoiding reality and a changing world.